So the Buckeye defense ready to be challenged in a different way this week as we welcome in Tony Gerdeman from BuckeyeHuddle.com. Gerd, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
We'll get into the Kyle McCord situation in a second, but let's continue on this defensive theme. Very interesting comments from Jim Knowles about a change in philosophy for Jim Knowles as this Ohio State defense goes forward.
Yeah, and this is something that I've talked about on my podcast over the last few months about his shift in not needing to be as aggressive as he has been in the past, because in the past he'd have to, being at Oklahoma State or Duke or Western Michigan, you kind of have to create chaos through scheme, and at Ohio State you should be able to do it through personnel as much as scheme, if not more so than scheme. So he's had to shift that you don't have to be as daring, as dangerous, and you just let the front four kind of create the chaos, and then you clean it up after that. So I think that's where the shift in philosophy has gone for him, and it's something that he started to realize maybe during the season, but certainly after the season, upon reflecting on what went right, what went wrong, and it was the aggressive defense that led to more big plays. And so if you want to get rid of the big plays, maybe dial down the aggression.
Are you concerned with the lack of sacks from the two-star defensive ends, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuilomoau?
You know, if you just look at the Indiana game, Indiana didn't really throw that much, and there wasn't necessarily a bunch of pass rushing to do. And so, you look at one game and you're like, hey, it's one thing, it's one game. Then it becomes two games, and I don't think it's nothing. Jim Knowles seemed to believe things are fine. He also said we'll find out for sure on Saturday when you're playing Western Kentucky, who will throw the ball 40 to 50 times, and they'll do a lot of it pretty quickly, so there won't even be any time to rush the passer on many of their throws. But at this point, they need to see something from the defensive ends, and not that sacks are the end all be all, but it is kind of how you judge how they are doing in terms of the overall scheme and creating a havoc and getting after the quarterback. And so if they go through that and they still don't have a single sack between Sawyer or Tuiolomoau, and we've heard all kinds of talk about Kenyatta Jackson, redshirt freshman, as well over the offseason. Caden Curry, we've seen him involved. If they're not getting sacks out of that position, it's not a great sign. And regardless of philosophy change or scheme unity between the front end and the back end, those guys are still trying to rush the passer. And if they're not getting there, then why aren't they?
That's going to be one of the interesting things to watch on Saturday is whether or not they get that pressure, whether or not the defensive backs are in coverage long enough to allow them to get that pressure, or if they get that pressure to help out the secondary, because it's very much complementary football in terms of the back end and the front end. And that's going to be one of the things that, in Ryan Day's words, will stress out the schematics of Ohio State's defense this week.
The pass defense starts with a pass rush, and the quarterbacks have played really, really well with that pass rush wherever it's been. The corners have been covering. And so, we might look at the stats of the defensive ends and maybe sometimes forget that they may be pushing the quarterback into the defensive tackles or the linebackers who are making or securing the sacks. But to not have a defensive end with more than like 3.5, 4.5 sacks for the last three since Chase Young left, basically, they're not getting enough production at that position. I'm not expecting nobody should expect Chase Young or Joey Bosa or Nick Bosa type of production. But as I keep saying, I think it's fair to expect Sam Hubbard type of production. It's fair to expect Tyquan Lewis type of production. And those guys did it while rotating as well. And, Tyquan Lewis was the Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year in 2016 or 17. There's no reason you can't get that same kind of production, those same kind of accolades, that same kind of impact from a Sawyer or Tuiolomoau if they are as good as they're supposed to be.
On Tuesday, Ryan Day made it official. Kyle McCord is QB1 for the Buckeyes. Started the first two games, but Devin Brown got significant playing time, or at least that was the plan. I think we all kind of saw this coming after the Youngstown State game, but Ryan Day said he wanted to watch the film, make sure what he felt on Saturday was true with what he saw in the film. So from here on out, barring injury, Kyle McCord is your starter.
Yeah, and one of the things he said about that is now the team knows for sure, and they can react and grow and start to see Kyle as the leader that they have seen him as, but now they no longer have confusion as to the quarterback. Kyle McCord no longer has confusion. And it was interesting that Day said he knew after the game, and then one, as you said, wanted to watch the film. But when he told Kyle on Tuesday morning, he said Kyle also knew. Like, it was pretty apparent. I mean, we all saw the game. I don't think anybody left that game thinking, well, this is Devin Brown's job. I think it was everything was solidified that day. And I think that's also what Ryan Day was wanting to happen. He's wanted this thing to be solidified for a while now, and to be able to do it in a way that everybody saw, maybe take some of the, not that he cares about necessarily the questions that he'll get from media or fans, but I don't know how you can question the decision that has been made at this point, having seen what everybody has seen in the first two games.
McCord, 3 touchdown passes against Youngstown State, 2 of those going to Marvin Harrison Jr., 1 to Emeka Ibuka. Marvin Harrison Jr., fantastic game, yet it was Ibuka who was named the Ohio State Player of the Game.
You know, he's a guy that can do a bunch of different things for you. He can help out in the sweep game, and he is a distraction as a slot receiver. He's a solid blocker, and he's a guy that if you focus too much on Marvin Harrison, you're making a mistake. And at just about every school in the country, he would be the wide receiver 1. At Ohio State, he's the wide receiver 1B to Marvin Harrison's 1A, but he's a guy that can do a bunch of different things. There's also a very secure punt returner, or at least a punt catcher for them. And he is maybe the second best receiver in the nation, and completely overlooked by almost everybody, including plenty of Ohio State fans who also truly appreciate him. But it's interesting to see the bar that Marvin Harrison has set, and the bar that Emeka Ibuka has set, which is also very high, but people don't see him on the same level.
We've talked about this in the past, the new clock rules, the way that affects the game. And Ohio State against Youngstown State had 9 drives, and 6 would have ended up in touchdowns if they wouldn't have incorrectly ruled Chip Tranum for a holding call that wiped out a Mayan Williams touchdown that Ohio State then turned it over on downs. But the new clock rules, they're the new clock rules for everybody. And Ohio State has perhaps struggled more than other teams. They're 70th, I believe, in the nation in scoring. Yet other teams are finding ways to score more points than Ohio State's 58 through 2 games.
Yeah, and I think that is a key stat, that other teams aren't being affected. Now, other coaches are also not happy with the rule, but they're figuring out a way to go about handling it. And they're doing that through being efficient and effective and executing basically with their offense. And that's where Ohio State is struggling. And as Ryan Day has said several times, that struggle has made the clock rule stand out more than it would otherwise. And it's also taking possessions away from Ohio State. You mentioned the 9 drives that they had. The last time they had 9 drives in a season was 2017 against Army. And that is a team that is running the triple option, trying to keep the ball away from Ohio State. The time previous to that they had just 9 possessions, 9 drives in a game, was Iowa in 2013. You've got to go back further than a decade to find that few of possessions against a traditional offensive team. And traditional is doing a lot of work here when talking about Iowa's offense. But it's a real thing. Now, I don't think that's why Ohio State is last in the Big Ten in picking up third downs. It should have nothing to do with it, with the clock rules. But I think they could maybe get away with more if they had more possessions, clearly. But right now, it's the lack of execution with the offensive line. I think enough, stopping the quarterback substitution pattern will help the offense entirely. And maybe just figuring out which 2 running backs you want to focus the ball with might also help, because I think it's hard for these guys to get into a rhythm when it's Travion Henderson, and then it's Chip Trayanum, and then maybe it's Mayan Williams, and then it's Travion Henderson again. As Ryan Day said on Tuesday, he wants Travion Henderson to get more touches, and I think that might also help.
And I think Ohio State's insistence on establishing a run game is also exasperating the situation, because they can go out and throw the ball more, and it's almost as if Ohio State's milking the clock as well. As they're trying to set this run game, because we've heard all offseason we're going to have to run the ball at the end of the season, but you can't beat Michigan by beating Indiana and Youngstown State.
Yeah, I do expect them to really just try to get the running game going against Western Kentucky, but it won't really necessarily mean anything because I think South Florida ran all over Western Kentucky in week 1 of the season. So you should be able to run on them. Just as they went into Youngstown State trying to get the passing game going, you should be able to throw on Youngstown State. So even though what they'll see against Western Kentucky isn't the stoutest of defenses, it would be nice for them to get some momentum, get some good feelings going with the offensive line, with the running game, because it's much better than the alternative. And in which case they try to run the ball against Western Kentucky and find out that they can't. And September or not, if you can't run the ball against Western Kentucky in September, good luck running it against Michigan in November when, yes, the offensive line will be better, but if it's not good enough to run it against Western Kentucky now, I don't know that it can actually get good enough to run it against Michigan or whomever in December or January. So I think they do need to get that running game going. But the third down situation with Ohio State, you wonder if that's there's so much more focus on third down now because of the clock rule. I wonder how much that impacts the play calling throughout a drive where does it lead to more first down runs because you don't want to throw an incompletion and have a 2nd and 10 and now you have to throw again because you want a shorter third down, and just all of the mind messing with the mind that the clock rule will do with Ryan Day, unless they just focus on what they want to get done and don't even worry about the clock. First worry about moving the chains, then worry about getting to midfield, and then worry about the red zone. And if they just fix the third down and the red zone, everything else will fall into place.
One thing we heard repeatedly on Tuesday is this is going to be a different type of game because we are fully expecting Western Kentucky to not milk the clock when they have the ball because they're all about throwing the ball, getting the ball out quickly. They want to have as many possessions as possible. So we might see what we want to see out of both offenses here, which is going to be a lot more plays from both offenses.
Yeah, and you'll see a lot more plays from the Ohio State defense as well and how they handle the passing game because they have not faced a passing game yet. And so we have a feeling for how the cornerbacks will do. They've done well. They haven't faced anything like this. I don't think we have much of an idea about the safeties, how well they can defend the pass. We don't even know who the starting free safety for Ohio State is going to be. So this is going to be a completely different animal for the Ohio State defense. But it's going to be great for Kyle McCord because he should get more possessions, more opportunities. Like I said, they'll probably try to establish the run, but that may lead to some tremendous play action opportunities, some shots down the field. So I think this is a game that the quarterback for Ohio State, Kyle McCord, will be looking forward to. I think it's going to be a game that Western Kentucky is kind of looking forward to as well, thinking back on last year's Ohio State defense, that this could be an opportunity for them to take some shots, to connect on some things. I'm sure they saw Youngstown State throw deep once and connect on that one. So they might have some confidence. They might not yet believe in this Ohio State defense. And I can't hardly blame them because even though Ohio State is giving up just 5 points per game right now, they've played 2 offenses that should only score basically 5 points against you. So it is going to be a different animal for this Ohio State defense. And with Western Kentucky trying to get as many plays as possible, how does Ohio State's defense handle that? How does the rotation on the defensive line handle that? What happens when Sonny Styles is kept on the field and Ohio State's not necessarily comfortable with him being a slot, covering the slot guy at nickel? Because as we saw against Youngstown State, they were pulling him out of the game on passing downs and putting in either Cam Martinez or Jordan Hancock. So what happens if Western Kentucky traps him out there but by going no huddle and not substituting? So there's a bunch of different things that I'll be watching for in this game and seeing how this Ohio State defense handles a completely different offense.
21 years ago, Ohio State won a national championship. 21 years ago, Western Kentucky won a national championship, the 1AA title, and that was Jack Harbaugh's final season as the Hilltoppers head coach. I want to thank our guest tonight, Tony Gerdeman from BuckeyeHuddle.com. Gerd, thank you again.
Thank you for having me.